Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. I am a warrior main that raids in a top 10 US mythic guild, and today I'm here to give a complete, fully comprehensive guide on Fury Warrior. In this video, I aim to answer pretty much any question anybody could ever have. I'm going to go over Covenants, Soulbinds, Conduits, gear, Trinkets, what race you want to play, talents, all that stuff, and probably in that order. I will have a timestamp of everything in the description, so you can just click through the video if there's something specific that you want to go over, or that you would like to see rather. I'm going to go over rotation in a separate video that should be already uploaded by the time that you watch this, so if all you're interested in knowing about is rotation, that will be in a separate video. The reason for that is that I want to go in depth in this video and answer every question that anybody could ever possibly have without leaving anything. So as a result of that, the video is probably going to be a little bit long, but that also means that I can go in depth on the rotation as well. So that'll be in two separate videos. Sorry if you want to watch all of it, because you might have to be watching me for a little bit, and you know, maybe that's not as much fun as other things, but hopefully at the very least you guys get a ton of information and you know everything that you need to do to perform well as a warrior, and that is the goal of this video. One thing I forgot to mention, if you're interested in which spec is actually better, Fury or Arms, I have a separate video about that I uploaded a couple days ago. However, if you don't want to watch that, the TLDR is that Fury is better in AoE all the time and better in single target once you have the gear to justify it. But you need a little bit of gear and potentially a legendary to make it better in pure single target. But for most fights in the raid, there is a little bit of cleave. Therefore, once you have the right gear, Fury can outperform Arms. There's a couple fights where Arms is a little bit better, but whatever. You can watch that video if you're interested in everything. And before I get into the video, I'd like to mention that I offer one-on-one coaching, so if anybody needs help with setting up their UI, getting better at performing the rotation, getting help with certain mechanics on certain bosses, pretty much anything that you could possibly need help with in this game, you name it, I could probably help you with it. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to message me over on my Discord, or you can shoot me an email at nick2biz@gmail.com, and I would be more than happy to help you out. Hopefully this video will serve to provide any information that you could ever need, but sometimes getting individualized and personalized help can be more beneficial than just watching a video. Some things it's easier to have help with if it's like one-on-one, and you can just ask any questions that you could ever want to ask. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So first off, Covenants. There shouldn't be much of a talking point. I know I might get some people mad with this, but I'm only going to be talking about Venthyr. If you play Spear because you're like a PvP guy, I'm sorry. Most of the stuff will be applicable regardless, but I'm not going to talk about other Covenant stuff, and that is going to affect the Conduits and the Soulbinds that you use. But pretty much 99% of warriors play Fury, or sorry, play Fury, not Fury, play Venthyr. As you can see if you go on Warcraft logs, it's literally everybody's Venthyr, and then there's like this one dude, Lobos, that plays Night Fae. I don't want to talk about the Night Fae thing because I don't even know why that's good, but he's the only guy doing that, and he's just going to get further and further outskilled by Venthyr. So I'm only going to be talking about Venthyr. Sorry about that. Venthyr is simply just better because it gives you the ability Condemn, which pretty much just makes your execute even better. And for Fury, this is particularly very good. It just means that you can Condemn more often, more rage gen, and just more damage overall. In terms of the Soulbind that you want to play, you have two options. Wrong thing here. You have two options between Nagia and Theatar. The main difference here is Thrill Seeker versus Soothing Shade. Thrill Seeker pretty much every like minute and 10 seconds, about minute and a half, it's going to give you a buff that's giving you 20% haste for 10 seconds. The only problem with Euphoria is that on some fights, since it is a specific timeline, on some raid fights, it's going to proc when you're like, so like it's, for example, on Council of Blood, it'll proc during the dance phase, so then you lose some uptime with the Euphoria buff because of the way that it stacks up. Whereas with Theatar, it's going to drop a shade randomly. This can happen 0 times or it can happen 20 times. It's very random. It drops a shade on the ground, and if you stand in it, it's going to give you a lot of mastery. Theoretically speaking, Theatar is really good. However, the problem is that it's very subject to RNG, and if there's any movement required, it's very possible that, like, let's say I'm on Sledgefish and I'm running away from the boss. It's very possible that as I'm running away, the Soothing Shade procs, and then I immediately run out of it. And there's a lot of instances of that. So personally, my recommendation is going to be Nagia. Pretty much everybody plays Nagia on logs anyways because it is mathematically a little bit better. The only time that you would play Theatar instead of Nagia, I believe, is for when there's those guaranteed fights where you're going to lose some uptime of Euphoria. But even then, some people still play Nagia because it's just too much of a bother to swap. So I would recommend playing Nausea anyways. And Haste is just very, very good for Fury, so all in all, pretty good. In terms of Conduits, the first best Conduit that you want is Depths of Insanity. This is just going to make your Recklessness last 26% longer, which is very powerful. Technically, Ashen Juggernaut, which is your second potency that you're going to go for, this sims slightly, and I mean very slightly better than Recklessness, the Recklessness Conduit in pure single target. However, the only reason for that is that it's assuming that you have 100% uptime on the boss, meaning that you never lose the Ashen Juggernaut stacks. And even then, the Recklessness one, the second there's a second target involved, it's straight up better. So if you're just getting your first Conduit, I would definitely use the Recklessness one that makes it last longer. And then your second one, you want to use the Ashen Juggernaut that increases the crit chance of your Condemn, that just stacks upward, and that's just free extra damage for your Condemn pretty much. In terms of your other conduits, for Finesse, you want to use the Rallying Cry duration and health granted are increased. This is overall just really good. And then for your Endurance conduit, you want to use the conduit that reduces the cooldown of your main defensive, which is going to be Enrage Regen. The only other potency that I would ever recommend using would be Harrowing Punishment, which pretty much just increases Condemn's damage dealt and prevented by a certain percentage for each nearby enemy. The only instance I would say that you should use this is in AoE. If there's like a ton of targets. Even then, I still think the Ashen Juggernaut is a little bit more consistent. And let's say you're doing Mythic Plus, the second that you're on a boss, you're not really getting any value out of Harrowing Punishment, but you are still getting the same amount of value from Ashen Juggernaut. So overall, I like to play Ashen Juggernaut, but if you don't have Ashen yet, you can use Harrowing Punishment in place of it, and it's not a big discrepancy. Once you unlock Renown 30, which I'm going to get next week, I believe, you can start playing Dauntless Duelist in pure single target. This pretty much just means that you deal 3% more damage to an enemy, and this is also going to unlock another finesse slot. All your other finesses are pretty bad, but this is just going to net you slightly, and I mean slightly, I'll show you the sim here, more damage in pure single target. Where is it? Here, it's an extra 31 DPS in pure single target, but only use it in pure single target. So fights like Shriekwing, Hungering Devourer, Sludge Fist, that's the only fights that I would ever play that in. And even then, the other ones might be a little bit more, might be a little better situationally speaking. So if you want to be lazy, don't ever touch Dauntless Duelist, and you can just straight up go down this tree. Also because it gives you, eventually you'll end up unlocking this, is pretty good as well. All right, that's going to do it for Conduits. Now let's talk about gear. First off, let's talk about stat weights. The best stat, bar none, is Haste. Second to Haste is Mastery. The main thing you want to think of in your head is just get as much haste as humanly possible, and then get Mastery next, and then crit, and then verse. If you want to see my exact stat weights, which by the way, this is already with 22% haste and 35% mastery, these are my stat weights currently. This is going to get a little bit better once I have, better gear and stuff like that. But already with this much haste that I already have, you can see that haste is still vastly outperforming all the other stats, and versatility is pretty bad, but just try to get as much haste as humanly possible. This is my gear with pure single target. Now let's talk about what gear you want to use in single target versus AoE, because this is actually going to depend. So the next most important thing would probably be your legendary, and then we can talk about trinkets and weapons and stuff like that. So in terms of your legendary, if you are just now getting to play Fury and you haven't crafted a legendary yet, the first one that I would make is Signet of Tormented Kings. This makes it to where anytime you activate Bladestorm, Recklessness, or Avatar, it's going to randomly cast one of the other two abilities. So right now, if I press Recklessness, it just gave me Avatar, and then if I press Bladestorm, it extended my Recklessness. Stuff like that is the reason that this is really good. This is particularly good in AoE, as your Recklessness can proc a Bladestorm, and then you can Bladestorm again, and Bladestorm just does a ton of AoE damage. By the way, the reason that mine is crit haste is because originally I was playing Arms for Raid, but since Fury got buffed, I started playing Fury. The reason that I would craft this first is because it is usually overall the better legendary. The second that two targets get involved, this legendary becomes better than the other legendary that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But overall, this is very good for AoE. This is very good for like 2 to 3 to 5 to 4 to 5 targets. This is ultimately just the best legendary that you can possibly make for Fury. The only other legendary that you would ever make is only good in pure single target, and this is Deathmaker. This is going to make it to where Rampage has a 30% chance to apply the Siegebreaker effect to your target. This is, again, only good in pure single target. The second that a second target gets added, the Signet of Tormented Kings ends up just outscaling it because of the Bladestorm potential. But you could use Deathmaker on like 2 targets, I guess, but the only reason I'm making it is for fights like Shriekwing, Hungering Devourer, or Hungering Destroyer rather, and Sludge Fist. But outside of that, I'm not going to use this legendary. So I would just focus on leveling up your Signet of Tormented Kings because that's better for every single boss fight other than those 3. And yeah, in terms of gems, enchants, etc., like I said, you just want haste, as much haste as humanly possible. In terms of your weapon enchants, if you're in raid, you want Sinful Revelation and Celestial Guidance. If you're doing like Mythic Plus AoE stuff, you want to swap out your Sinful Revelation for Lightless Force. The reason for this is that Sinful Revelation is only going to increase your damage on one particular target, and with Fury, you're tab target swapping targets all the time. So if Sinful Revelation were to proc and then you instantly swap off the target, you got 0 value, and Lightless Force is simply just better in an AoE circumstance anyway. Hello, this is me editing. I forgot to talk about Single-Minded Fury. The main difference is that it is 1% overall damage, about 1 to 1.5% damage less than using just 2 two-handers. So if you only have 2 one-handers that are high item level, you can use them for now. But ultimately the goal would be to use 2 two-handers. Titan's Grip is just better, but again, sim yourself. Now let's talk about Trinkets. Trinkets are a little interesting because it depends on if it's pure single target or AoE. However, I have some recommendations for you guys. We're going to take a look at some sims here. Don't take this chart with a grain of salt because this is also assuming you're playing Siegebreaker, which you only would ever do in pure single target, and even then that's not that good, but I'll talk about that when I get into talents. But generally speaking, this is to an extent accurate, and I'll just give my own recommendations because I've played with a lot of the trinkets, and certain things just are better in practice than they are on sims, and sims aren't always the end-all be-all. So ultimately, one of the best trinkets is Stone Legion Heraldry. The reason for this is that it can drop at a pretty good item level. If you end up being a Mythic Raider, you can get it at 233, which if you get it at 233, it's probably going to be your best one, especially because it sims higher with the more people that have it, and then you're also buffing your teammates if they have it. Another good thing about this is that the effect of it just increases your stat, which is going to scale in AoE, whereas some other trinkets such as Dreadfire Vessel are only good in single target. The second, if I were to change this to Raid Boss with ads, or even just AoE Dreadfire Vessel, okay, it seems much higher than I thought it would, but it only scales in single target because it just does damage to one target. I think it seems a little bit higher than it actually does, but I don't have a 233 one, so just take my word for it. One of the other trinkets that you would probably want is Phial of Putrefaction. This scales pretty well in AoE because it's going to stack on multiple targets, especially with Meat Cleaver, that'll apply it to all the targets that you're hitting. But this also just does flat damage and is very strong. Overwhelming Power Crystal is another good one. I don't think it's as good as it sims because it is simming with Siegebreaker, meaning that it is going to assume that you're using Reckless. Like, if you're playing Siegebreaker, your Recklessness cooldown is going to be a minute 30, but you don't actually end up playing that. So Overwhelming Power Crystal, instead of working with every single Recklessness use, it's going to work with every other Recklessness use. Therefore, it's not as good as it's going to sim for. Dreadfire Vessel is very good in pure single target. Outside of that, I wouldn't really recommend it. Same thing with Memory of Past Sims. IQD is pretty good. However, it is very inconsistent. Sometimes it can like heal people, give mana, etc. And on top of that, it's only going to work every 3 minutes, where if you want consistent damage, it's not going to help you out with that. Skulker's Wing is another thing similar to Dreadfire and Memory. Not only can it bug out, but it's also just pure single target damage, so it's not that good. Anima Field Emitter is a very good trinket. However, the way that it works is it plops a circle on the ground, and just like Theatar, if you have to move out of the circle, instantly you lose a lot of value. The trinkets that I'm using currently are Sinful Gladiator's Insignia of Alacrity. This for some reason doesn't sim very well, but it is pretty good. The main benefit of it is that it is a PvP trinket, so it is very easily obtainable. It has haste, and it has a very high proc rate of just giving you primary stat, which is always good in AoE. The only downside is that it can be a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes you can have 20% uptime, sometimes you can have 60% uptime, and it varies greatly. So personally, I would like to replace this trinket with like Phial of Putrefaction. If there's any takeaway from this, these would be the best 3 trinkets that I would try to get. Stone Legion Heraldry, Phial, and Overwhelming Power Crystal. They are more consistent than every other trinket, and they're ultimately very good. However, getting them is a little bit difficult. But Insignia, you can guarantee easily get it from the Conquest vendor, and usually it's kind of consistent, but sometimes as a result of those inconsistencies, it can really hamper your damage, and That's not something that you want to happen. Another trinket I use is Sinful Gladiator's Badge of Ferocity. This is not going to sim very high on this because, again, it's using Siegebreaker, but this is a 1 minute on use trinket. The reason this is good, I would only use it in dungeons because when you use Anger Management, the talent, it's going to reduce your Recklessness cooldown to about 1 minute in dungeons, meaning that you can use this trinket every single Recklessness use. The problem is that in pure single target, especially in Execute, when you're generating more rage, therefore expending more rage, therefore reducing the cooldown of your Recklessness even more, you get your Recklessness down to about a 45-second cooldown, especially with more haste and with lust and stuff like that, which then begins to desync your Gladiator's Badge of Ferocity with your Recklessness, and then that gets pretty bad. So if the way that I use this trinket is if I'm in AoE, in dungeons, I use this trinket, and then my Recklessness is on average about a minute. But then if I do pure single target, I swap over to my Memory of Past Sins. Dance of Macabre sheet, or Macabre sheet music, whatever, that is on the list as well. This is pretty good. The problem with it is that it's very difficult to play with. It's very annoying to play with, and if you don't play with it absolutely perfectly, you are bound to lose damage. I would consider this trinket a trap, and I would not recommend using it. But things like Memory, File of Putrefaction, all that other stuff that is listed, I'll even leave a link to that website. All that stuff, those are the trinkets that you want to go for. If anybody cares about what race technically sims higher, honestly, I wouldn't care about it personally. Gnome, Goblin, and the Night Elf, Human, blah, blah, blah. Who really cares? Most people play Orc. It really doesn't matter. At most, it's a 1% increase for Goblin. If you want to be a Goblin, go ahead. I would prefer to be a Goblin, but I don't really care that much. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. I simmed all of them personally with my own sim and with using different talents and such, and Goblin and Gnome still simmed higher, but it's at most a 1% increase, so it doesn't really matter. But the cool thing about Goblin is that you get Goblin Jump. The bad thing is that you have to be a Goblin, so, And the community perception is that Orc is just straight up better, so do whatever you want. But these are the numbers. To close off the video, we're going to talk about talents. So this is going to depend on AoE or single target. In AoE, you want to play Fresh Meat. The reason for this is that, let me talk about what it does. So it makes it to where Bloodthirst always enrages you the first time that you strike a target, and it has a 15% increased chance to trigger Enrage. The reason this is good in AoE, particularly like dungeons, not very good in Raid, but it's very good in dungeons because when you go to a new pack, you can guarantee that your first Bloodthirst on an enemy is going to Enrage, and you can instantly start doing your rotation rather than having to build up Rage to then get Enrage and then start using your other cooldowns. You can just fly in the pack, instantly use Bloodthirst and get Enraged. Sudden Death and War Machine aren't as good. War Machine is pretty bad, especially for Fury, but Sudden Death is pretty good in Raid, and Sudden Death is what you want to use in pure single target as well. In terms of this tree, Double Time typically is what you want to take in Raid. If you need healing, you can go in Pending Victory, and Stormbolt is what you would go in dungeons for some CC. Next tree, Massacre, you always take just because Condemn is so valuable. Being able to use it when the target is below 35% rather than 20% just makes you end up having so much more damage. If you aren't playing Venthyr and you don't have Condemn, people play Frenzy, but this is only good on pure single target. Next tree, Furious Charge, garbage. Bounding Stride is good if you need mobility. Warpaint is generally the go-to pick because it's just 10% reduced damage while in Rage, which you are in Rage very frequently. 40 tree, you want to go Cruelty. This is going to make your Raging Blow just do more damage overall. Frothing Berserker is okay as well. Seethe is absolute trash, but Cruelty is overall just the better pick, and you don't even have to play around it specifically. 45, Meat Cleaver, bad. Ignore Meat Cleaver. For pure single target, you usually go Dragon Roar because it's just a better version of Bladestorm in single target, especially because if it crits, it just does triple damage. However, the second that there's more than one target, Bladestorm becomes better than Dragon Roar, especially when you pair it with Signet of Tormented Kings because it's going to activate another buff. And Bladestorm just does an absolute ton of damage. Bladestorm is pretty much always the go-to pick outside of a few niche instances of there just being pure single target. In terms of the last talent, Anger Management is generally going to be what you're playing all of the time. Technically speaking, like you saw in those sims, Siegebreaker sims about it's like 0.2% higher than Anger Management in pure single target. But if we take a look at the logs here, literally everyone's playing Anger Management, even on pure single target fights like Sludgefish here. I can just look at Artificer's IMOS because a lot of people, there's a lot of logs for this. Pretty much everybody is playing Anger Management. The only reason that I could ever see you playing Siegebreaker is if you're using a trinket that is a minute 30, such as, where is it here? Does anybody have it here? Such as Overwhelming Power Crystal, because that's a minute 30. The difference isn't huge. Reckless Abandon, I would straight up just not play. I don't know why people are playing it, but there honestly isn't a big difference. But the second that AoE gets involved, you immediately take Anger Management. If we take a look at Stone Legion Generals, literally every person is Anger Management. There's not a lot of people here, but every person is Anger Management because it is just straight up better. Getting a cooldown reduction on Recklessness is absolutely insane. More uses the better, and I would honestly just argue that it is more consistent than these other talents, but up to you. Alright, that's going to do it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave it down in the comments below. And if you're interested in the rotation, make sure to check out the video that I post following this one. Alright, thanks guys, and have a good one. Peace.